And mic check. Woo. All right. That was funky. Hope that's not reverbing again. So, good evening. Welcome to Library. I know it's been a while. And I hope you guys been having a fun summer. I've been doing some things. I know those of you who follow me on Facebook know I've been fixing up my house, trying to do things, but a lot of busy things. I was up at the ARRL board meeting this past week. A lot of interesting things going on there. But you'll have to wait for that. Come on, we're not talking about that anyway. So tonight we're going to talk about the question pool. Prime Day, I bought a bunch of stuff. I even got some stuff. I even got this drill. This is a drill. This is not a back massager. It's a drill. It has a LCD display. Ooh, telling you the torque. All right, but we're not going to talk about that. Or what else I got on Kickstarter, like this creation space screwdriver set that I use for taking apart things, or where I've been. My favorite range. All right. So anyway, yeah, that was a little too hot. So now we're going to talk about the tech pool, and we're talking about the technician class exam. Now this is more intended for people who want to get licensed. So I've been meaning to do some of this, but I figured I'd wait until the new technician pool came out. So what's happening is that periodically, well, first of all, let's back up a bit. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, we do a lot of fun things here. So like and subscribe. You might like it. It's free of charge. And, plenty of ways to stick around. We talk a lot of stuff. We talk amateur radio. We might joke around a little bit. And I talk about a lot of interesting things, space, program, etc. Probably some light prepping. But, and those of you considering getting into amateur radio, I know a lot of people I've talked to, they looking into two-way radio. Ham radio is very good because GMRS and FRS give you basic communication within your neighborhood, right? And probably around town if you have repeaters. But amateur radio gives you communication beyond your local neighborhood, and it will give you communication around the globe and even into space. Okay? I mean, we talk to satellites, we talk to astronauts. I think we're one of the few radio services that actually does that. I don't think there's any other radio service that lets you talk directly to the International Space Station. And we're going to talk some of that. So tonight, yeah. So the way things are is that the FCC does not do amateur licensing anymore. Okay? The FCC has delegated that out to what they call the volunteer examiner coordinators. And the volunteer examiner coordinators are groups that administer exams, and they grade the results and then send that to the FCC. They send the results to the FCC, and the FCC issues the license. So we're very much self-sufficient in amateur radio. And even other services have kind of like this similar system. So, it's always good to do that. Some upsides to that are that we can have tests at all different times. We don't have to go to an FCC office. In New York, they had one on Varick Street in Manhattan. Back in the day, I was told. I wasn't around then. Of course not. And some of them traveled. Some of them were like in Chicago and I guess LA and, and such like that. So it's it's a lot of things. So anyway, so the organization known as the National Council of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators, they coordinate this question pool, and the question pool basically is developed by these teams of people submit questions, and the questions get considered for inclusion in the question pool, and then they pick some questions from this question pool based on certain topic areas called sub elements, and then they put down your test. Thunder asks, I'm studying with ham prep for my technician. Are the tests in person or online? So the tests they can be in person, right? but there are what you call remotely supervised exams. So they're not an online test that you go on a website and just do a test by yourself. No, you have to set up with a team, and the team could have the test on a website using a software called Exam Tools, which is a website, or they could use other methods, but they were using Exam Tools. What they will do is they'll remotely supervise you with a camera to make sure you're not cheating, you know, and they, because they have to do that. Okay. There are all sorts of regulations, like you must have 3 VEs at each session, volunteer examiners. So, all right, so let's get started here. I hope my thing worked. I'm not using the regular ATEM streaming setup, and I'm actually using my MacBook, which I can now. So I bring up this Word document here, and let's see here. You have a general. Do you know of any countries in Europe that have reciprocal that I don't have to get extra for ham? So you can use your general in Europe, but as a novice, so you'll probably be restricted to like the foundation license privileges under CEPT. From what I understand, nearly all of Europe uses the CEPT, which is Conference of European Posts and Telecommunications, right? And CEPT. I will do a whole thing on that. I actually did a video back in the day on that. But I could quickly look that up. CPT US General. Let's see here. Yeah. But I know they actually treat the general like a foundation license, So they don't really give that right. So general class license to be granted, reciprocal license in some CPT. Yeah, there is an 8 article. I'll drop it in the comments, but we're not really talking about that tonight. So I will just I'll drop that in the comments for you to look at. Okay. Okay. So yeah. So that was article for me to work on. All right. So let's dive in. Okay. So we have here the question pool, and you can see here. I'm just going to briefly scroll through this. They divide this up into several sub elements, right? And sub elements are basically topic areas that they cover, and these are basically areas that of knowledge that you have to know in order to pass your exam. And I'll give you a few examples of things, and while we go through the questions. But basically they have like the rules. T1 is the basic rules, right? T2 is operating procedures. T3 is radio wave propagation, how radio waves get from point A to point B. And T4 is practices, like how to set up your station and operate the controls. I've done some of that on this channel, but I'm going to go through the questions. You have electrical principles in T5, so basically current, voltage, math. And the math itself is not hard, because in reality you can use several shortcuts to do the math, okay? So there is really no, don't panic. Oh, I didn't do good in math in high school. Relax, 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 okay? You're not going to be asked to derive Maxwell's equations, okay? You're going to be dealing with things like decibels, in which you have shortcuts. Okay. T6, okay? The components, T7, practical circuits, and they use simple circuits, okay? T7, using test instruments like multimeters and stuff like that. T8, signals, like the single sideband, FM, and such like that. T9, antennas and feed lines, so how to orient your antennas, what's gain and such like that. And then feed lines like coax and ladder line and such like that, right? And then T0 is safety. And I did a video on this channel on RF safety, and they do actually ask you about RF exposure, okay? All right, so let's start out. So this goes from 2022 to 2026, and we're going to see how much we get through tonight. I'm probably going to do another stream. Maybe I'll do one midweek. You're always welcome to follow along on Team Replay if you're not able to join us live, but I always appreciate you guys joining us live, so no worries. Right, so T1, Commission's rules. The purpose and permissible use of amateur radio service, operator/primary station license grant, meanings of basic terms used in FCC rules, interference, RACES rules, phonetics, always a fun topic, frequency coordinator. Okay, so the first question is, which of the following part is a part of basis and purpose of amateur radio service? Okay, the answer right here is C, advancing skills in the technical communication phases of the radio art. Okay, so I'll explain this. A, providing personal radio communications for as many citizens as possible. That's wrong, because amateur radio is not really designed for people to provide personal radio communications. B, providing communications for international nonprofit organizations. This is a tricky one. The answer is no. And of course, since those are incorrect, all these choices are not correct. So their basis and purpose in part 97.1. So 97.1 lists basis and purpose, and I'll read them off here. Let's see here. Okay. So basis and purpose, right? The rules and regulations in this part are designed, and let me see if I could bring it up on screen here for you. And let's see here. You know, I have a separate web browser for that. Right, FCC part 97. Okay. Let's bear with me for a minute. Okay, part 97. Okay. Right, so 97.1, and this is the FCC, but AWL makes it easy to do, so I'll just do one ringy-dingy here, okay? And, okay, so basis and purpose. So the rules and regulations in this part are designed to provide an amateur radio service having fundamental purpose as expressed in the following principles. A, recognition and enhancement of the value of the amateur service to the public as a voluntary non-commercial communication service, particularly with respect to providing emergency communications. And I think these days a lot of people know that ham radio can provide emergency communications, right? B, continuation and extension of the amateur's unique ability, proven ability to contribute to the advancement of the radio art. C, encouragement and improvement of the amateur service through rules which provide for advancing skills in both communication and technical phases of the radio art, right? And so basically what C means, so B, of course, means that radio amateurs are always, helping define the art of radio, not just amateur radio, but radio communications in general. This is people think this is less so today than in previous years, but there are a lot of things that amateurs are doing that are kind of getting into the public sphere. Encouragement and improvement. Okay, so advancing skills in both the communication and technical. So look, you don't have to be a techie, an engineer, a genius to do ham radio, but you increase your skills when you become a radio amateur, right? And not only in technical, but also communication. So you learn proper communication procedures. And D, expansion of the existing reservoir within the amateur radio service of trained operators, technicians, and electronics experts. So back in the days, actually, the FCC and the AWRL were having this debate over, how to get more people into STEM, basically for the Cold War or the space race with Russia at that time. And that, interestingly, is how incentive licensing came about. But they were actually doing, trying to increase STEM using amateur radio. And of course, continuation and extension of the amateur's unique ability to enhance international goodwill. Well, you know what, guys? This is DXing, okay? Because, when you DX, you make so many good friends. So, that's good stuff. All right, so let's get back to the pool, okay? I'm not going to dwell too much on the wrong answers. Okay. Now, the next question is, which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service? The answer is the FCC. And if you don't know that, then you probably need to figure out, exactly how you're going to do ham radio. But FEMA, no. FEMA actually helps us with emergency. They they ask us to provide emergency communications for them, Homeland Security as well, which I believe is related to FEMA. And of course, since these two are incorrect, all these choices can't be correct. So the answer is the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Okay. What do the FCC rules state regarding the use of a phonetic alphabet? Notice the language is a, not the. There is not just one phonetic alphabet. I know some hams are gonna ding me for this, but you know what? If there have been over the years, there have been several phonetic alphabets. Okay, so the answer is that it is encouraged. So the FCC rules state that using a phonetic alphabet for station identification in the amateur radio service is encouraged. It's not required. Okay, nobody's requiring that. It's not required. Okay, so those answers that say required are not true. There is no FCC regulation saying that you're required to use a phonetic alphabet or any phonetic alphabet. The answer is for next one, T1A04. How many operator primary station license grants may be held by one person? The answer is one. Okay, so you can only have one primary station and license grant. Now, you can also have a club call. Okay, you can be the trustee of a club station license, but you use your operator license to operate that station. That's fine. You're still going to have one operator license, but you can operate as the control operator of a club station, and we'll get that later on. So the answer is one license to rule them all, right? Okay, let's see here. Yeah, unfortunately, the non-standard phonetics do drive people nuts, but at the same time, there are valid uses for them, and I don't ever see them going away. So it's just something we gotta, to learn to work with. What proves the FCC has, that's T1A05, what proves the FCC has issued a operator primary station license grant? The answer is C. The license appears in the FCC ULS database. So a license is not a piece of paper. A license is not a PDF. It's not a badge. It's not an ID card. A license is a database record in the FCC Universal Licensing System that says that you are authorized to operate on amateur radio frequencies with this license class. That's why as soon as your license appears in the FCC database, you are eligible to operate, even if you don't have a license document. Now, this is different from some other types of licenses. Like, for example, if you have a concealed carry license, in many states, you have to have it with you. In New Jersey, you have to have it with you when you're carrying. Okay? So anyway, T1A06, what is the FCC Part 97 definition of a beacon? Right? And the answer is D, an amateur radio station transmitting communications for the purposes of observing propagation or related experimental activities. So a beacon basically is a one-way transmission that you'll send out like a call sign first of all, because every transmission must have a call sign in most cases. Then it'll probably send out some tones, right? Some Morse code tones at different power levels to basically test propagation. So for example, if you listen to 14.100, you might hear 4U1UN, which is the United Nations, and they'll say 4U1UN in Morse code, and then you'll hear like a long tone, and it'll get quieter because they're sending it at a different power. I don't know if the beacon is still working, but yeah, so it must be for purposes of observing propagation or related experimental activities. So these beacons are usually owned by the IARU. They're run by the IARU and NCDXF, Northern California DX Foundation. Okay, all right. The rest of these, government transmitter, no. There are no government transmitters that mark the band edges. It's up to you to know them and observe them. The bulletins sent by the FCC. FCC don't send us bulletins anymore. A continuous transmission of weather information in the amateur bands by National Weather Service? No, they don't do that. They have NOAA weather radio on VHF. Okay, so T1A07. What is the Part 97 definition of a space station? And it's very specific. Okay, an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above Earth's surface. So this is interesting. Let's say KD9OLN decided to do like Felix Baumgartner. Remember him, Red Bull guy who jumped from a perfectly good spacecraft? And let's say he goes up above 50 kilometers and decides to jump down. I don't know if he could even do that. Can you? That is a space station, of course, but we know space stations as the ISS, as satellites, as when the Russians had, Mir, and we had Skylab and all of these other space stations up there, or even a space shuttle, right? Those are space stations, or even something on the moon. That's a space station. Okay, so there's a very specific definition. It is 50 kilometers and more. Okay, the answer is, these answers aren't correct. Any satellite orbiting Earth, because no, it doesn't have to be a satellite. A manned satellite, no. An amateur station using amateur radio for satellites for relay of signals, absolutely not. That is a satellite repeater, okay? All right, so T1A08. Which of the following entities recommends transmit and receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations? Okay, so a repeater station, you know what a repeater is. It takes an input, let's say most likely from a handheld radio like a Baofeng, and then it will retransmit that far and wide. Usually it's on a mountaintop or a high building, or allows you to reach further than you can with just a radio. So the answer is B, a volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. Now, these volunteer frequency coordinators, here we have one called Metrocore, okay? And Metrocore is an organization that coordinates frequencies. What they are is basically a volunteer group of hams who come together and they maintain a database of local repeaters, and they basically, assign them repeater pairs where they're not going to interfere with each other, right? And it's very important because they're, because if you don't have them, you might have people transmitting on top of the other. And in fact, it's so important that the FCC rules state that when you have a coordinator and a repeater is coordinated, if an uncoordinated repeater interferes with that repeater, the uncoordinated repeater is in the wrong, okay? And the coordinated repeater is in the right. That's why people value coordination. Nothing is stopping you from putting up a repeater. You don't have to ask permission from anybody except that you must have an amateur license. But you must, if you interfere, then you have to yield the frequency to a coordinated repeater. Okay, let's move on. Who selects the frequency coordinator? And the answer is C, amateur radio operators in a local or regional area who are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. So basically, hams, local hams, and this basically means anybody holding any license really, because the novice license, oh no, sorry, my mistake. Anybody technician and higher, okay? So anybody eligible to be a repeater or auxiliary station. I don't think technicians could be or could have repeaters. Technicians have like one VHF band, which is 220, they could operate on. Okay, so that's C. T1A10. D. What is a radio amateur civil emergency service, or RACES? So RACES used to be a big thing in the Cold War days, and RACES is kind of fizzled out, except that some towns like to use them as their voluntary emergency communication service. So the answer is all of these. I'll explain all of these. A radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense communications, yes. A radio service using amateur stations for emergency management or civil defense Communications, yes. Okay, so using the frequencies and the stations. Okay, amateur. An emergency service using amateur radio operators, right? Certified by a civil defense organization as being enrolled in that organization. So RACES has three components. You can use the amateur frequencies, the stations, and the operators. So all of these are correct, right? So you have a civil defense organization, and usually this will be like a municipality, Office of Emergency Management, or in New Jersey we're under the sheriff's office for RACES. So it's the county sheriffs deal with that. Okay, this is an easy one. Okay, T1A11. When is willful interference to other amateur stations permitted? When you think so, at no time. You may not interfere with anybody ever. Amateur stations, okay? Now, if you go on 28.0855 and you hear some CB talking, you fire up on PSK 31 or FT8, tough luck to them because they're not amateur stations. They're not legal, okay? So, but, interference is just not good, right? And it's not legal. Okay. So we're actually done with our first sub element, believe it or not. Our first part of the sub element. So that's T1A. You see how easy that was? T1B, frequency allocations, emission modes, spectrum sharing, transmission near band edges, contacting the ISS, power output. Okay. All right. So this one asks you to memorize frequency allocations. So T1B01. Which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone operation by technician licensees? Okay. Yeah, Texas prison stories. You can jam a station if there's emergency. If there's a bona fide emergency and you need to get, you need to get a message through. Okay. And if you jam like an unlicensed station, that's I don't know. It should be fine. But if you're jamming just during, it's at no time, you should accept. I think that's kind of vague. I really think that there is an exception for emergencies, but of course anything goes in emergencies, and I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 or something like that. So yeah, okay. So T1B01, which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone operation by technicians? So technicians get a limited phone allocation. They get from 28.3 to 28.5, okay? And that is SSB only, okay? Single sideband. Yes, of course, deliberate malicious interference, right? If it's accidental, non-malicious, then, it could just be an accident. But 28.3 to 28.5 megahertz is the phone allocation, but technicians are only allowed single sideband in that frequency range. They can't do AM, double sideband AM. They can't do FM, right? Okay, T1B02, which amateurs may contact the International Space Station on VHF bands? The answer is any amateur holding a technician class or higher license. Now, this is currently true because the ISS has VHF transponders on board, okay? But let's say the ISS got a 220 megahertz radio, okay? Then novices, because novice is the only lower class than technician, and they don't issue novices anymore, would be the only one. Well, they would be able to contact the space station, but since the space station is using VHF, anybody holding a tech and above. And this is good because if you have school teachers and they get a tech license, they could be making contacts with the space station via the space station and teaching in their classroom. Okay, T1B03, which frequency is in the 6 meter amateur band? While the 6 meter band goes from 50 to 54 megahertz, is just below TV channel 2. Answer is B, 52.525. Novices didn't get. The novice license was actually very easy to get. Somebody could just, any licensed ham could just administer a Morse code test and a basic written test, and you get a novice. It wasn't hard at all. So B, 52.525 is frequencies in a 6-meter amateur band. All right. T1B04, which amateur band includes 146.52 megahertz. Probably the most famous amateur radio frequency ever. And the answer is in the 2-meter band. Okay? So 2-meter goes from 144 to 148 in the United States, and some countries have less of an allocation, but they're pretty much within that range. So 2 meters. T1B05, 97.305C here. How many amateurs use the 219 to 220 megahertz segment of the 1.25 meter band? Okay, and the answer is fixed digital forwarding message systems only. So this means things like packet radio, okay, or WinLink probably. So you can use 219 to 220. So the history of this band is we used to have, I believe we used to have 220 to 225. And then back in like the 90s, 80s and 90s, UPS or FedEx wanted a piece of the band for some commercial operations, which they never did actually. They never got around to it. They took our spectrum and then they just did nothing. Okay, thanks a lot. But they took away 220 to 222. And then we got 219 to 220 for these packet BBSs. So now 220 is going to be used for positive train control. So that's one thing. Okay, which T1B06, which HF bands does a yes, true. Exactly about Russ about the TV channels. Right, okay. So T1B06, on which HF bands does a technician class operator have phone privileges? The answer is 10-meter band only, right? So only on 10 meters, 28.3 and 28.5. Now, this actually was an artifact of the novice privilege. So the novice privileges had this 10-meter band, and the text did not. And when they removed Morse code for HF, which was back in like 2007, was when it came into effect, the techs got the novice privileges, which includes CW on 80, 40, and 15, and also phone on 10. So they get Morse code on 80, 40, and 15, and then phone on 10. So technician class has phone on 10 meters. T1B07, which of the following VHF, UHF band segments are limited to CW only? So you generally find that on 6 and 2 meters that the first 100 kilohertz of those bands are limited to CW only because they're for weak signal. So the answer is A, 50.0 megahertz to 50.1 and 144.0 to 144.1. Okay? The rest of these are incorrect. Well, we already covered 219 to 220, and the rest of them, this restriction is only on 6 meters and 2 meters. Of course, one thing of note is that Morse code, you can pretty much use it on any amateur band anywhere. There's really no restriction. The only restriction used to be 60 meters, and they got rid of that. They said you can use Morse code on 60. So T1B08. How are U.S. amateurs restricted in segments of bands where the amateur service is secondary? The answer is A. U.S. amateurs may find non-amateur stations in those segments and must avoid interfering with them. So, some people might not know that we share bands with other services, and they actually are primary. Like, for example, the 70 centimeter band, 420 to 450, is actually shared with the U.S. Air Force, right? And the U.S. Air Force has radar in that band. Near like Cape Cod has one. I'm not sure where else has one, but I know Cape Cod has one. It's called Pave Pause. And it uses that frequency range. I think they might have upgraded that and called it something else now. I think they're decommissioning pave pause, but we will find other people in some of those bands, and we should not interfere with them. So what happens is in Cape Cod, for example, they restrict the power you can use for that band, for a 70 centimeter band. So you can't really use high power there. Okay. All right. T1B09. Why should you not set your transmit frequency to be exactly at the edge of an amateur band? Well, this is one that a lot of us make. So, Sean, to answer your question, there are novices alive. You remember a video that I took down of this guy who sent me some creepy coupons? He was a novice, okay? And he's still alive. Ouch. I know I had to bring that up. Yeah. So anyway, so to allow calibration error in the transmitter frequency display. Yes, because you know what? Your display is not accurate, right? You're not running like a highly stable frequency display. So you must give yourself some room in order for for a discrepancy to not cause a problem. And then B, so that modulation sidebands do not extend beyond the band edge. Yes, because when your radios transmit, it always spills over a little bit, right, with the sidebands. So you want to make sure that you're not on the edge and you're not throwing stuff inadvertently out of band. C, to allow for transmitter frequency drift. Not so much a problem in newer radios, but in older radios, as they heat up, they might shift around. So the answer is D. All of these choices are correct. Okay. T1B10. Where may SSB phone be used in the amateur bands above 50 megahertz? And the answer is C, in at least some segment of all these bands. So basically, in all these bands, you can use phone, not a problem. Okay. T1B11. What is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician class operators within their HF band segments? And they basically gave you the novice power limits of 200 watts. Okay, so you have a maximum of 200 watts in the HF band segments, right? So on 10 meters and also 80, 40, 15. T1B12, except for some specific restrictions, what is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician operators using frequencies above 30 megahertz? So the answer is D, 1500 watts. So technicians have the full gallon and a half on VHF and above. So they can fire up FT8 on 6 meters using their amplifier, like I do. And we're end of T1B, believe it or not. That was easy, right? So, if some of this is taking some time to digest, you can always go back on Team Replay and watch. Okay, so we're talking about licensing, the class of license, call signs, and places where it's regulated by the FCC, name and address on the license database, term, renewal, grace period, maintaining. So basically, how the FCC treats your license, okay? All right, T1C01. For which license classes are new licenses currently available from the FCC? Well, currently available are technician, general, and amateur extra. Okay. Yes, Zigglefingers, I have seen 1.5 kW. My friend Ranko 403A has one in the lab. Believe it or not, right? I have an amplifier that does 1.5 or 2 kilowatts on 6 meters, right? I only run up to 1.5 kW, but they're VHF amplifiers. Definitely. Oh yeah, they're there. Trust me. T1C02. Oh yeah, so basically technician, general, amateur, extra. The novice and advanced are gone, but you can still retain them. Tech Plus is gone too. The last Tech Plus renewed their license and or didn't renew license. Well, they became a tech. T1C02. Who may select a desired call sign under the vanity call sign rules? So just like you can select license plates, you can select vanity call sign. My call sign N2RJ is a vanity call sign. So any licensed amateur may select a desired call sign but your call sign must fit your license class, okay? Because certain license classes are restricted to types of call signs. T10C03, what types of international communications are FCC licensed amateur radio stations permitted to make? So, and this is a shocker, okay? Communications incidental to the purposes of the amateur radio service and remarks of a personal character, okay? So, what does this mean? So, you cannot, it means basically you can't run a business on amateur radio, right? We could talk about the weather. So, incidental to the purposes of the amateur radio, that basically means signal reports, talking about equipment, test transmissions, you know, saying antenna 1, antenna 1, antenna 1, antenna 2, testing radios and such like that, okay? Remarks of a personal character. You're just old, you're just talking about things, not business. Like in Trinidad, we have a term for that. We call it old talk, okay? Where you just talk about anything, right? Okay. Um, the novice cannot file to become an instant general. The Tech Plus, who took the general exam, could have become a general, right? Um, yeah, okay. So let's see here. Right, T1C04. What happens if the FCC is unable to reach you by email? The answer is B, revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license. I know a guy who got a nasty letter from the FCC because the FCC could not reach him by mail. Now they ask for your email address, and they're not going to make that public, but they ask for your email address, and you can just use that for correspondence. And if they can't reach you, if the mail bounces, they'll try to work with you. First of all, they might send you a nasty letter or two, but then they will pull your license if you don't respond, because you're supposed to respond to the FCC. Is there an online source of correct answers? There was one floating around somewhere. It's pretty hard to find. My friend Mark Klein, N5HZR, is going to release a book called The Cram Book, Correct Radio Amateurs Answers Manual. I have a project coming up soon, so sit tight. I can't really talk too much about it, but I'll let you guys know when it's ready, okay? Right. T1C05. Which of the following is valid technician class like call sign format? The answer is A, KF1XXX. So basically, 2x3, right, could be technician. 1x3, like for example, I don't know, W1ABC could be a valid technician call sign, right? You can't have shorter call signs. You can't have 2x2 for text. You can't have 2x1 or 1x2. All right, T1C06. From which of the following locations may an FCC licensed amateur station transmit? The answer is D, from any vessel craft located in international waters, undocumented or registered in the United States. So the rest of these answers here are basically wrong. Like for example, from within any country that belongs to the ITU, no. I can't transmit in North Korea. I can't transmit in China without getting a license. I can't transmit in many countries without getting a license. Okay? From within any country as a member of the United Nations, no, same thing, right? Although North Korea I don't think North Korea is part of the UN, are they? I'm not sure. C, from anywhere within International Telecommunication Union regions 2 and 3, no. I can't go into any country and just transmit. They might lock me up. So the thing is, if you're on a vessel or craft located in international waters, meaning the high seas, so if you're on a boat on the high seas and the ship's registry is in the US, yes, you can use your US license. Okay, and that's generally true for most countries, right? T1C07. Which of the following can result in a revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license? The answer is B, failure to provide and maintain a correct email address. So it's basically the same thing as before, just asked in a different manner. Okay. T1C08. What is the normal term for an FCC amateur issued radio license? And in this country, you get 10 years at a time. Okay? Some countries are 5, some countries are every year. Like in Trinidad, they made us renew every year. Now it's every 3 years, and they make you pay money. Well, here they make you pay money too. T1C09. What is the grace period for renewal of an amateur radio license expires? You got 2 years. Of course, as soon as, so if you renew before and it's in process, you may continue to transmit. If you renew after it expires, you have to stop transmitting. Okay? Okay, so yeah, so North Korea is a full member of the UN. Okay, good. DPRK. Right. Yeah, so the answer is 2 years. Now, the interesting thing is that if after those 2 years you want to get back into amateur radio, all you need to do is take the tech test and you will be fully readmitted into your old license class, right? So let's say you were extra and you let the license lapse, life happens, or you might be sick or something, and then you get better and you want to get into amateur radio. Well, you just take the tech test, okay? All right, T1C10. How soon after passing the examination for your first amateur radio license may you transmit on the amateur radio bands? The answer is C. As soon as your operator station license grant appears in the FCC's license database. Yes, so remember I said the license is a database record. It is the document, the license document is proof that that record exists. Okay, so as long as there's that database record, you may transmit. T1C11. If your license is expired and is still within the allowable grace period, may you continue to transmit on the amateur radio bands? Like I said, D. No, you must wait until the license has been renewed. Okay? Right, so we're done with T1C. Thunder has said, this may be a silly question. Can you pick up ham radio signals with a shortwave radio? Yes, you can, but most shortwave radios are actually AM. To properly pick up most ham radio signals, you need a radio with single sideband. So if you have a radio with single sideband, you can receive amateur radio HF transmissions. Okay? All right. So T1D deals with authorized and prohibited transmissions, communication with other countries, music, exchange of information with other services, indecent language, compensation for operating, that means money, retransmission of other amateur signals, encryption, sale of equipment, unidentified transmissions, one-way transmission, okay? So T1D01, with which countries are FCC licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communication? And the answer is A, any country whose administration has notified the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, that it objects to such communications. So let's say, I don't know, let's say Russia told the ITU that it does not want any of its citizens talking to Americans, okay? And that could be plausible. What they will do is they will tell the ITU formally that they don't want that, and then we can't talk to them. B, any country that tells the ARRL that objects to such communications? No, ARRL doesn't have that power. Any country banned from such communications by the IARU? Nope, the IARU is a voluntary organization. It's not a government organization. D, any country banned from making such communications by the ARRL? No. Okay. So the answer is A. Okay, so they must tell the ITU. And the ITU is an international agency of the UN. T1D02. Under which circumstances are one-way transmissions by an amateur station prohibited? Not in all circumstances, believe it or not. Okay, so you can make CQ calls, you can make test transmissions, no problem. But broadcasting is not allowed. Okay, you're not allowed to broadcast. You can send Morse code practice, like W1AW does. You can send telecommand, or transmission of telemetry, for example, from a satellite, or telecommand to a model aircraft, a model drone, T1D03, when is it permissible to transmit messages encoded to obscure their meaning? Well, the answer is not never, because there are legit times you want to do it. The answer is C, only when transmitting control commands to space stations or radio control craft. So for example, you have a satellite that you don't want people just basically being able to control the satellite. So you encrypt it. You encrypt your communications, okay? Radio control craft, same thing. You have a drone up in the sky, sure, you can use encrypted communications toward that drone. Yeah. I have a drone certificate, Ziggle Fingers, okay? So I'm perfectly well in my rights to talk about drones. Alright? T1D04. Under what communications is an amateur station authorized to transmit music during a phone emission? Again, there is an exception to this, okay? The answer is A, when incidental to an authorized retransmission of manned spacecraft communications. So basically, the ISS or the space shuttle used to have let's see here. Used to have like NASA used to send up music to these astronauts, and of course people were retransmitting the space station communications, and it had music, and the FCC didn't want to just stop us from retransmitting the space communication, so they made that rule. T1D05. When may amateur radio operators use their stations to notify other amateurs of the availability of equipment for sale or trade? The answer is, it's not never again, D, when selling amateur radio equipment and not on a regular basis. So, you know what? If you sell a radio on a swap and shop net, okay? Or you mention in passing, hey, I have a radio here I'd like to sell. You can mention it on the air, and that's it. You don't have to, tell people, well, I really can't talk about this. Uncle Charlie's going to come knocking at my door. No. You can do it. All right? Of course, profit doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And then B is ridiculous when the equipment is not the personal property. Okay, so what? You can only sell somebody else's radio? No. Okay? All right. T1D06. What, if any, are the restrictions concerning transmission of language that may be considered indecent or obscene? Right? And the answer is B. Any such language is prohibited. So no obscene languages, no indecent language. T1D07. What types of amateur stations can automatically retransmit the signals of other amateur stations? The answer is D. Repeater, auxiliary, or space stations, right? Beacons do one-way transmissions. Earth stations are basically just, satellite Earth stations. And auxiliary stations, no. So the answer is D. Repeater, auxiliary, or space stations, right? Auxiliary, beacon, or Earth stations. A is wrong. So the answer is D. Repeater, auxiliary, or space stations. Okay. T1D08. In which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive compensation for operating that station? Again, there are exceptions for this, okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, you know what? I could make that smaller, the camera. But let's see here. Oof, what am I doing? Okay, all right. Camera, let's see here. Let me make that smallify. Ta-da! Okay, right. So, which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive compensation for operating that station? The answer is B, when the communication is incidental to classroom instruction at an educational institution. So, you want to know something? Yes, teachers can use ham radio and they can be paid because people don't like to teach for free, okay? The other exception, of course, is they made a narrow exception for the control operator at W1AW or similar organization that transmits bulletins. So that's the other exception. T1D09. When may amateur stations transmit information in support of broadcasting, program production, or news gathering, assuming no other means is available? Well, when such communications are directly related to immediately, um, let's see here now, immediately to the directly related to the immediate safety of human life or protection of property. And I'd like to acknowledge T Ray. Thank you, T Ray. That's very nice of you. You get to help spread around the knowledge. Awesome. Okay. Um, let's see here. Right. T1D10. How does the FCC define broadcasting for the amateur radio service? The answer is D, transmission intended for reception by a general public. So this is a narrow thing. You might notice like W1AW and others send bulletins out, right? They send out bulletins. But bulletins are not broadcasting. Okay, as weird as it sounds. Not according to the FCC, because bulletins are intended to all radio amateurs. You notice they'll say QST, QST to all radio amateurs. It's not intended for the general public, even though the general public can receive. Okay, so yeah. Okay. T1D11. When main amateur station transmit without identifying on the air. D, when transmitting signals to model control model craft. So model craft would be like model aircraft and model boats and stuff too. In those cases, you don't transmit your call sign. What you do is you put your call sign on the controller and the craft. So I believe it's on the controller itself or on the craft itself. And then, if it crashes or something, people could find out whose it is. Okay? Okay. T1E, control operator, eligibility, designating privileges, duties, location, required, control point, etc. Control types, automatic, remote. Okay. T1E01, when main amateur station transmit without a control operator. Never. Every station has a control operator. Period. Okay? End of story. The reason, but in the case of like a repeater, the repeater will have a control operator who could log in remotely and shut off the repeater in case things happen. T1E02, who may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station. D, any amateur allowed to transmit on a satellite uplink frequency. So 2 meters, T1E03, who must designate the station control operator? A, the station licensee. So let's say you're the trustee of a club call, right? You're a trustee of W1AW. Who must designate the station control operator? Well, the station control operator, the station licensee, the trustee of the club station could assign anybody as a control operator, but they must be in control of that. T1E04, what determines the transmitting frequency privileges of an amateur station? The answer is D, the class of operator license held by the control operator. So we have incentive licensing in the United States, okay? And we restrict that for various license classes. T1E05, what's an amateur station's control point? The answer is C, the location at which the control operator function is performed. So it's the person who could key the mic, turn the knobs and such like that, okay? T1E06, when under normal circumstances may a technician class licensee be the control operator of a station operating an amateur extra class band segment? The answer is at no time. So if you're a technician, you can't be the control operator of a station in an extra class band segment. Even if a technician were to come to my house and I let them operate, under my call, they can't automatically operate an extra. But on the other end, most people don't know, can't tell, so whatever. T1E07, when the control operator is not the station licensee, who is responsible for the proper operation of the station? The answer is both of them, control operator and a station licensee. T1E08, which of the following is an example of automatic control? Repeater, okay? You can operate your kid, so your kid can never truly operate you can let them squeeze a mic and talk to it, but legally you are the control operator. Also, you're restricted to which countries you could talk to. You can't talk to countries with which we don't have a third party agreement. T1E09. Which of the following are required for remote control operation? A. The control operator must be at the control point. Yes. B. The control operator is required at all times. Yes. C. The control operator must indirectly manipulate the controls. So yeah, so this would be like, for example, an internet remote station, right? So the control operator might use remote software to manipulate the controls of the station, and they're under remote control operation. So the answer is D. All these choices are correct. All right. I'm gonna try to get through section T1. I think we're just T1F, and yeah, okay, yeah, we could get through this quickly, and then we'll be done for the night. T1E10. Which of the following is an example of remote controls defined in Part 97? Answer is B. Operating a station over the internet, like I just mentioned. T1E11. Who does the FCC presume to be a control operator of an amateur station, unless documentation to the contrary is in the station's records? The answer is D. The station licensee. So the FCC presumes the station licensee is the control operator. T1F. Identification, repeaters, third party, club stations, FCC inspection. When must the T1F01? When must the station and its records be available for FCC inspection? B. At any time upon request by an FCC representative. I remember Ham Radio Crash Course did a video how the FCC could come knocking and inspect your station, but probably in reality that rarely happens. T1F02. How often must you identify with your FCC assigned call sign when using tactical call signs such as race headquarters? The answer is C. At the end of each communication and every 10 minutes during the communication. So, not at the beginning, by the way, okay? So I could be yapping up and say, hey, Ralph, blah, 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 and we talk, and then at the 10-minute mark, I just say N2RJ, and then I go another 10 minutes, and then when I'm ending the conversation, say N2RJ, and that's it. Yeah, it's weird. So, but just remember, every 10 minutes and at the end of each communication. T1F03. When are you required to transmit your assigned call sign? D. At least every 10 minutes during. All right, so this is the 10-minute rule. T1F04 for ID. Funny, yeah. T1F04. What language may you use for identification when operating in phone subband? The answer is English. Do you speak it? It's English. And unfortunately, that's still true in places like Puerto Rico and Miami. Okay? English is required. T1F05. What method of call sign identification is required for a station transmitting phone signals? The answer is B. Send a call sign using a CW or phone emission. So when you're talking on phone, you can actually send your call sign in Morse code. Or you could send in voice, of course. T1F06. Which of the following self-assigned indicators are acceptable when using a phone transmission? So KLCC stroke W3, KLC C7CC slant W3, and KLCC slash W3, KL7CC. So all these choices are correct. Okay. So yeah, you could either use stroke, slant, or slash. T1F07. Which of the following restrictions apply when a non-licensed person is allowed to speak to a foreign station using a station under the control of a licensed amateur operator? The answer is B. The foreign station must be in a country which the U.S. has a third-party agreement. So third-party agreements are basically we have those the State Department sets that they get those agreed to with other countries, and we can send messages to them. T1F08. What is the definition of third-party communications? Right? It's not CEPT. No, it's basically a list maintained by the State Department. So the answer for this one, what is the definition of third-party communications? A message from a control operator to another amateur station control operator on behalf of another person. So basically, somebody sending a message through a radio amateur to somebody else. T1F09, what type of amateur station simultaneously retransmits the signal of another amateur station on a different channel or channels? The answer, of course, is a repeater station. T1F10, who is accountable if a repeater inadvertently retransmits communications that violate FCC rules? The answer is A, the control operator of the originating station. So this protects repeater owners. If somebody decides to get on your repeater and just blow up F-bombs everywhere and talk about sex like Howard Stern, they get in trouble. Not you, the repeater operator, owner. Okay? T1F11. Which of the following is a requirement for the issuance of a club station license grant? And the club station must have at least 4 members. That's a hard requirement. All right, so I did T1. We'll do T10 another day. I'll probably try to do it separate of Live with Rhea, but we kicked off this project here. And I want to thank you guys for sticking through. Look, if you have new hams that want to get licensed and such like that, you can send them this way. Again, thank you, T-Ray, for helping for the super chat. Really appreciate it. You go above and beyond always. So, it's always nice to see you guys there. So, my friends, have a good rest of your week. And as always, peace and 73s.